tamed by another species. Well, until we get an invasion from Mars, we shall not be tamed by another species. All we can do is to try to tame ourselves, that an oligarchy tries to tame ourselves, but the oligarchy still remains wild. I mean, however much it succeeded in domesticating the rest of the race, it must remain wild, and this was the part of the fable, the dramatic part of the fable of Brave New World, is that the people in the upper hierarchy, who were not ruthlessly conditioned, could break down. And I mean, this Charles Darwin insists that because man is wild, he can never expect to domesticate himself, because the people on top will always be undomesticated and will sooner or later always run wild. Well, I think there's a good deal to be said for this this point of view in regard to the permanence of any dictatorship.
Yes, I have a question. I'm worried about a relationship that seems to exist between cost, consent, and control. If a government wants to control its people, of course, its job will be easier if they are more willing to consent, and the job will be correspondingly more costly if the corresponding consent isn't there. Could you make a few remarks about the economic feasibility of introducing biological controls of the sort you talk about?
I don't know. I mean, wouldn't it, I would have thought in some ways it would be cheaper than maintaining very large security forces and concentration camps and so on. I mean, just as in asylums, chemical control is a great deal simpler and cheaper than physical control. I mean, the bad old days of straight jackets and manacles and so on required quite a lot of people to handle the insane, whereas the tranquilizers seem to require much fewer. I mean, that you can get equal results with simpler and certainly pleasanter means. I have no idea about the actual cost situation, but it seems to me that it might actually be cheaper. I don't know.
Well, I see that some of you are leaving for your 4 o'clock classes, and I will give you an opportunity to leave now. If Mr. Huxley would be willing, we might be able to entertain some questions from the floor for a few moments. Would you say?
Certainly, yes.
Will those of you who are obliged to leave now, please return?
I apologize for having gone on so long.
Oh, no, that's fine. I'm sure I much prefer to hear you discuss these questions, but I think we might be able to show up. I hope you're not finding it uncomfortably warm in here.
Well, it's getting a little warm, isn't it? There seems to be a completely windowless hall, isn't it?
It's part of the conditioning process, I'm sure.
Is there any means of ventilation in this hall? I see one door there.
But the next Tuesday at 2. Next Tuesday. I think there is some ventilation. Ventilation never seems to be able to meet the demands. Wasn't the Conference of Santa Barbara discussing some of these developments?
Well,
the new drugs and...
no, they were mainly discussing, I mean, there was a lot about the problem of bringing technology to the underdeveloped countries. They had a lot of people from the United Nations there. A very able man who was a Vietnamese called Vu Van Thai. Charming man. He was spoke English with a strong French accent because he'd learned his economics in Paris, and he was very interesting. I mean, he said, I'm speaking to you like a rat with electrodes in my brain because I speak from the inside. I'm not one of the experimenters on the outside. So, and he was very interesting about it. I mean, about the difficulty that when you do introduce, say, one area of highly evolve technique into one of these backward countries, you create an enormous gap between the people who run this thing and profit by it and the mass of the population. I mean, a gap which is just as serious as the gap between the have-not and underdeveloped nations as a whole and those who, and the haves and the developed. And what he was saying was that you must have an adaptation of technique which shall be suitable for these people and not try to bring in what you have already, but he said very little work has been done in this field. And there were a number of, there were several very able people. Richard Calder at the University of Edinburgh was there, and Arthur Goldschmidt, who is the director of the special services in the United Nations. And we had some extremely good talks.
Bring that up, Sean. Well, I have one question here, which is, well, this is essentially the question which Mr. Huxley addressed himself to in his last statement, is how will control over the techniques been transmitted from one group to another? Apparently referring to how to the control of the techniques be transmitted from one elite, one generation elite to another. Would you wish to comment further on this question? I know you did speak to it just before.
Well, I don't think so. I mean, I do think there will clearly be a difficulty. I mean, there is always a difficulty in transferring power. I mean, after all, hence the constitutions, written constitutions such as in the United States, or a hereditary monarchy, in which you've got de facto power being de jure, and the possibility of passing power on without much hitch from one generation to another. It may be that in a thoroughly well-controlled dictatorship, the problem of power at the top, the struggle for power, would not take place. But even there, I mean, simply because the oligarchy is itself not subjected to the extremes of conditioning, because it must retain a certain freedom in order to be able to make adequate decisions. That maybe the struggle for power would always remain a great problem, as it has been throughout history, except where you have had written constitutions or acceptable monarchies.
Yes?
Dr. Huxley, would you adhere to the view and comment on the view that it's precisely the American society of Western democracy is particularly susceptible to this type of brave new world, with the following reason, that society is conditioned to adhere to a great degree of social conformity, that in your period of stress, this idea of conformity is further pushed, and consequently it makes it much easier to develop these techniques, and that it seems that politically, the extremities, there's a growing feeling that we have to do away with the extremities, and we have to keep on going the central path. And this would seem to me to make this much easier for a type of dictatorship, as you said, to slowly, using the mass media that we're developing, mold the population, plus the factor that in some of the other type societies, you have less inhibition about the brutal struggle for power within the top hierarchy, whereas here, there would be some type of a inhibition due to the so-called legal process that has developed, which would keep man from then violently attacking the leaders.
This business about conformity, I just don't know. It seems extremely difficult, certainly for me, to judge whether there is a higher degree of conformity here and now than there has been in other places and in the past. I mean, I would have thought the tendency towards conformity was to some extent offset by the enormous differentiation of function in modern society. I mean that nothing could be less homogeneous in function than a complex modern society. I mean, people are doing extraordinarily